We've got some terrible news coming out of Washington, D.C. as two National Guardsmen were shot at point blank. They are both in critical condition, and one even had to be resuscitated. Take a look at what happened.
Everyone, my name is Jeff Carroll. I'm the Executive Assistant Chief here at the Metropolitan Police Department. At approximately 2:15 this afternoon, members of the D.C. National Guard were on high visibility patrols in the area of 17th and I Street Northwest when a suspect came around the corner, raised his arm with a firearm and discharged it at the National Guard members. The National Guard members, there were other members that were in the area. They were able to, after some back and forth, able to subdue the individual and bring him into custody. Within moments, members of law enforcement in the area were also able to assist and bring that individual into the custody. At this time, as the director mentioned, the National Guard members are being treated at a local hospital. DC Fire and EMS responded to the scene to provide first aid for those individuals and transport them to a local hospital. The suspect in this case was also transported for treatment at a local hospital.
I know there's been a lot of pushback about having these National Guardsmen patrol the streets. I know people are completely against the military being in the streets, but this underscores how important their mission is. Crime in Washington, D.C. has significantly dropped since they started patrolling the streets. Now let's take a look at what President Trump had to say about the situation.
My great fellow Americans, earlier today, on the eve of the Thanksgiving holiday, two members of the National Guard serving in Washington, D.C., were shot at point-blank range in a monstrous ambush-style attack just steps away from the White House. This heinous assault was an act of evil, an act of hatred, and an act of terror. It was a crime against our entire nation. It was a crime against humanity. As President of the United States, I am determined to ensure that the animal who perpetrated this atrocity pays the steepest possible price. I can report tonight that based on the best available information, the Department of Homeland Security is confident that the suspect in custody is a foreigner who entered our country from Afghanistan, a hellhole on earth. He was flown in by the Biden administration in September 2021 on those infamous flights that everybody was talking about. Nobody knew who was coming in. Nobody knew anything about it. His status was extended under legislation signed by President Biden. This attack underscores the single greatest national security threat facing our nation. The last administration let in 20 million unknown and unvetted foreigners from all over the world, from places that you don't want to even know about.
And did we expect anything else? We understand that with President Trump, it's a large-scale response. So this one Afghan commits that violence, it's going to be a widespread response to all Afghans that are in the country. And I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but this should be expected by the American people. It's the same situation that happened with the Somalis in Minnesota, where they were stealing billions of dollars worth of healthcare benefits, claiming that their kids had autism or that a bunch of kids had autism. What did the president do? He canceled TPS for the Somalis. Now, the legality of that is being determined, but that's exactly what I expected him to do. Same situation here. Now, if you don't remember this flight in Afghanistan, this is the one where all the Afghans were hanging out of the plane trying to get on. Take a look at this. In case you guys don't remember, this is also that chaotic withdrawal where we lost 13 service members as well. And that was a disaster. That was unfortunate. That should have never happened. Now, remember, the number is extremely high. We're talking about tens of millions of people that came into this country. And that number is being debated. We don't know exactly how many people came into the country, but it's a lot. And when we talk about the vetting that was happening for these people, we don't understand where these people came from. We do understand that there were a lot of people that shouldn't be in this country that are here now. Here's a little bit more on the terrorist.
In custody is Rahmanullah Lakanwal, the individual suspected in the case, who also sustained gunshot wounds that authorities do not consider life-threatening. This 29-year-old, originally from Afghanistan, arrived in the United States in 2021 as part of Operation Allies Welcome, a program initiated by the Biden administration to assist in the evacuation and resettlement of tens of thousands of Afghans following the U.S. exit from Afghanistan.
We had the graciousness to take him into the country, give him benefits, give him health care, give him everything that he needed And this is what he did in response. This is what he gave the country in return, shooting 2 service members that were doing their job. There are a lot of reports out there about who this guy is. We understand that he came from Afghanistan. We understand when he came. We understand what program he was a part of. And as we all remember, the borders were completely open during that time. So it wasn't just the people coming from Afghanistan that could potentially be a threat. It was everybody that was coming over the border could potentially be a threat. Not everybody was. Now it's being reported that this guy had 5 kids. So this guy was receiving benefits. Everybody was living here in the United States. He was given peace, tranquility, if you compare to the situation in Afghanistan, and this is what he gave the country in return. You know, I consider this guy a coward for what he did, but here are some witnesses telling you what they saw.
Moved the vehicle, and that's when we saw 2 National Guards on the ground, and one they were trying to resuscitate. And then at that point, it was still even a couple of minutes before there was any response.
We ran into the nearest cafe, and shortly after there was Secret Service surrounding the building and the streets, taping off the streets, and we saw one National Guardsman being wheeled out on a stretcher, and he had a device helping pump his heart, it looked like, doing automatic like CPR, and his face was covered in blood.
You know, it's in situations like this where we say, well, this is unfortunate for everybody. You know, it doesn't matter what party affiliation you have, whether you're from the left or from the right. This is just an unfortunate situation. You know, our thoughts and prayers are with the National Guardsmen and their family. But that's too good to be true. We can't think like that. Here is an MS Now reporter talking about how he saw the situation on the ground.
As the investigation unfolds into the tragic shooting of 2 National Guardsmen in Washington, D.C., MS Now journalist Ken Delaney is facing backlash for his on-air reaction to the violent attack. Watch.
But of course, you know, there's so much controversy happening in the United States right now with ICE, who are also wearing uniforms and wearing masks. And so there's, you don't know, people walking around with uniforms in an American city. There are some Americans that might object to that. And so apparently this shooting has happened.
You know, his take on this whole thing is absolutely ridiculous. He's talking about ICE agents walking the streets with masks on. What does that have to do with this situation? Completely absurd take on this right here. But why are they doing that? Why is MS Now doing that? They're doing that because they're catering to their audience. Do you think their audience wants to hear anything else? That's what they want to hear. They want to hear something blaming the right. They want to hear something blaming President Trump and his policies. So right now what they're doing is they're blaming this whole situation and the National Guardsmen being shot on President Trump's immigration policies. Make that make sense. And as a result of this shooting, there has been heightened alert. So President Trump has directed the Secretary of War to activate 500 extra National Guardsmen to occupy the streets of D.C., rightfully so.
President Trump has asked me, and I will ask the Secretary of the Army to the National Guard, to add 500 additional troops, National Guardsmen, to Washington, D.C. This will only stiffen our resolve to ensure that we make Washington, D.C. safe and beautiful. The drop in crime has been historic. The increase in safety and security has been historic. But if criminals want to conduct things like this, violence against America's best, we will never back down.
You know, this whole situation in Washington, D.C. is tragic. My thoughts and prayers are with those National Guardsmen and their families. This is especially tragic since it's happening a day before Thanksgiving, when we're supposed to be most grateful for everything that we have. But it also underscores the dangers of having open borders. There has to be a vetting system in every country. And I think we've learned from all the issues that Europe is having that open borders don't function. They don't work. And now we're moving from one tragedy to the next, which is the violence in Chicago. The streets of Chicago continue to be ravaged by violence, specifically from teens. And Mayor Johnson refuses to do anything about it. Take a look at these numbers. So far, year to date in Chicago, there have been 385 murders, 1,362 shootings, 5,367 robberies, and felonies. We're talking about 16,799. But the mayor continues to say that his city's safe. And we all know how these cities work. They underreport these numbers. Because if they reported the actual numbers, there is no way that the citizens of Chicago wouldn't be pushing for more help from the federal government. However, the violence has gotten so bad in Chicago that the mayor himself has had to admit that he's not doing everything he needs to do to keep Chicagoans safe.
What we put in place did not do enough to prevent what we were concerned about from actually manifesting.
I think the mayor just needs to take the help that he's being offered by President Trump. Take the help. Let the federal government spend their dollars to clean up your city. What that does is it enables your police to get back to policing, to helping the citizens of Chicago. Let the federal government spend their money. If you don't want ICE as part of that package, just say it. But show the people of Chicago that you are willing to work with the federal government to reduce crime in the city, to help the citizens. Here's President Trump speaking about some of the violence that's recently occurred in Chicago.
Well, President Trump sounding off on Chicago following a string of violent crimes, including the 26-year-old woman set on fire on a train last week.
They burned this beautiful woman riding in a train. A man was arrested 72 times. We could make Chicago a safe city in a period of 4 weeks. And if you look at the crime that's taken place in Chicago in the last 2 weeks, just take a look. It's on the front page of every newspaper. It's out of control.
But you know, one of the previous clips, we heard the mayor say that he's not doing everything that he needs to do to ensure that the citizens of Chicago are safe. For those of you that are thinking, well, maybe he's changing his tune, he's not doing that. He's not going to change his ways. Listen to this analysis on why he's saying what he's saying right now.
Let's bring in Chicago Alderman Raymond Lopez. Raymond, that acknowledgement by Mayor Johnson is a different sort of tag. We haven't heard that from him before, but why is he doing that now, and what's your reaction?
Well, Griff, good morning. I think the reason that the mayor's pivoting now is that he understands that Chicagoans are fed up with his failures, and he knows that Election Day is less than 8 months from today. You know, he could say and try to pivot all he wants, but all of these failures come right back to his doorstep. The blood is on his hands for what we've seen happen this weekend, because when it came to the teen takeover and the 300 individuals that descended on downtown, we had the opportunity to institute a snap curfew that would have allowed the police to better manage that. He vetoed that ordinance because he didn't want to profile black children. When it comes to the CTA and the burning of that poor woman, he has handcuffed not only our Chicago police, but transit police as well, not allowing them to use all of the tools as well as follow these individuals when they are on the trains causing chaos. This falls at his feet squarely, and he knows that Chicagoans have had enough.
So I think there's 3 very important points that we need to take out of that analysis. First of all, he's handcuffing police officers. He's limiting policies because they think they racially profile children. And he's refusing to take action that benefits the majority instead of the minority. If you look at those 3 things, these are all the same policies in sanctuary cities. That is why there's so much violence in sanctuary cities. It's where the criminals feel they're safest. If you want a city to compare to New York, because the same things are happening there. In New York, police officers are being handcuffed as well. They are not allowed to enforce the law the way that it's written on the books. And as a result, violence is out of control. I think the mayors in these cities are not doing what they're supposed to do, what they were elected to do. Take the federal money, take the federal assistance, let the federal government clean up your cities, and having the police get back into the neighborhoods to police, to serve the community. That's what needs to happen with the police departments in these cities. So now let's move on to our next story, which is the Ukraine. Unfortunately, there's going to be a price to pay for Ukraine when it comes to the peace deal, the 28-point peace plan that President Trump put forth. Here's President Trump speaking about some of the concessions that Ukraine is making to Russia.
Do you think that Ukraine was being asked to give too much land back to Russia?
The way it's going, if you look, it's just moving in one direction. So eventually that's land that over the next couple of months might be gotten by Russia anyway. So do you want to fight and lose another 50, 60,000 people? Or do you want to do something now?
Do you have a new deadline?
When it's over. And I think everybody's tired of fighting at this moment. They're losing too many people.
Once again, I think the president is right here. You can let them keep fighting. Thousands, tens of thousands of people are going to continue to die. Or you can look for a ceasefire. You can look for a pause. Everybody stay where you are and let's look to peace. This all falls on the responsibility of the EU. The EU should have never allowed this invasion to happen. Remember, this is in their own backyard. They should have prevented this from happening. And now the expectation is that the United States is going to clean it up. Now, here's a really good take on why this deal is not as bad as people think.
The territory piece is really painful because this is no victory for Putin. Russia hasn't taken all of the Donbass. But at this point, Trump's plan is to freeze pretty much at the line of contact. And I tell you, the economic package for Ukraine is worth it for Ukraine going forward. instant access to the EU, Black Sea grain shipping, electricity from the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, maybe even some frozen Russian assets. So if you want a prosperous Ukraine in the future, this may be the price.
So when you look at the 28 points in this peace plan, some of it doesn't seem too bad. Like I've said before, negotiation, mediation, and peace, there's always going to be a loser, and it's usually the weaker of the two people that are trying to come to an agreement. However, just when we thought Russia was happy with the 28-point peace plan, it is now being reported that they are preparing to reject the deal. Listen to this.
Former U.S. ambassador to NATO, Kurt Volker, served as a U.S. special representative for Ukraine in President Trump's first term, joins us now. Ambassador, a lot of optimism coming out of the Ukraine, EU, U.S. talks, but in Abu Dhabi, where the Russians are engaged, what do you hear?
Well, the Russians, I think, are just simply going to insist on their original demands and not negotiate at all. I think what happened here is they produced a wish list of everything that they want based on what Putin said in Alaska. This is what originally got published as a U.S. plan. Rubio was then dispatched by President Trump after seeing how horrific this plan was to go clean this up, work with Ukrainians, Europeans, get something reasonable. That seems to be what he has done. Everyone seems happy with this now. The U.S. and Ukraine aligned on this plan. And now the Russians are already laying the groundwork for rejecting it, saying, no, that's not what we wanted.
I think this is major news. I think if Russia is aligning with China to reject this proposal, I think the United States needs to get stronger against Russia. I think secondary sanctions need to happen where we punish a lot of these countries that are doing business with Russia. Or the other thing we can do is provide long-range weapons to the Ukrainians who are asking for tomahawks. The Russians have those type of weapons right now. The United States can simply say, we are going to even the playing field. We're going to give them weapons very similar to what you guys have right now. Put pressure on Russia to negotiate. Russia continues to feel empowered, and the United States needs to take action to ensure that that stops right now. And I think one of the reasons Russia feels empowered is because our principal negotiator, Steve Witkoff, is not necessarily the person that we need to have in that position. I don't think he realizes that Russia is the enemy. I don't think he realizes that. One of President Trump's weaknesses is that he's a loyalist. He assigns people to positions based on how loyal they are to him. And sometimes that yields people that are not qualified to be in the position that they're in, especially in a position as important as this one.
As for Witkoff, I've never met the man. He seems like a nice guy, but he seems that he doesn't know these issues well. There are reports overnight that some of the phone calls he had with the Russians have been leaked out by someone, again, possibly the Russians. And they reflect a lack of understanding of Russia actually being the aggressor here, that Russia has attacked and killed civilians and raped and abducted children and needs to be stopped. Instead, it's trying to partner with Russia, the aggressor, on figuring out how do we get President Trump to just push the Ukrainians.
Now, once again, I don't think Steve Witkoff is the man for this job. I think Secretary Rubio should be handling this personally. Secretary Rubio is not going to bend the knee to Russia because he is savvy when it comes to international relations and the geopolitical threat that Russia is to the United States. I think the United States needs to do a better job when it comes to dealing with Russia. I think President Trump needs to get firm. He needs to be just as firm with Russia, if not firmer, than he is with Ukraine. And until President Trump does that, I just don't think Russia is going to be serious about getting into the negotiating table. This is the reason President Trump was not at these meetings. That's why he's sending these representatives. Russia is going to continue playing games with the United States until President Trump gets serious about the punishment that he's willing to dish out to Russia. Okay, those are the stories for the day. I hope you guys enjoyed them. Like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, stay balanced.